Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah. Wassalatu wassalamu ala Rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa man walah. Rabbi shrah li sadri wa yassir li amri wahlul 'uqdatan min lisani yafqahu qawli. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome, dear brothers and sisters. Thank you for your kind welcome to al-Futuhaat. Of course, I had heard wonderful news about the efforts that are building here, and I was very keen to be part of them. Unfortunately, my new colleague Adam had also highlighted that this is something that we should do while here, and maybe he was surprised when I said, yes, I know al-Futuhaat and I'm ready and raring to go. So alhamdulillah that we're together. I will try to actually keep my remarks relatively short, and they will be somewhat autobiographical, because I think it could be interesting to share something about my experiences as an Azhar student, as many of you are, and what has happened since then. Because when you are a student at Al-Azhar, it is obviously a world full of potentialities, but also a lot of question marks about directions that you can go in. How can I be useful? How can I also further my studies after this time here? And who can I work with? What are the projects? And this is something which I did not know or have a clear picture of at the time when I was studying. So I want to share a little bit about that story. And maybe as I go through and raise a few case studies or things that might catch your interest, then I can hear what you want to know more about or what you'd like to ask about. Maybe you just want to ask questions about tafsir, that's fine. Inshallah, we'll do our best. Or it might be things that relate to this journey as well. So studying at Al-Azhar, of course, was the opportunity of a lifetime. It is something which I cherish very dearly. It was not my first rodeo, as they say, or not my first degree. Having studied before that in Edinburgh University, I did various courses and then graduated in philosophy. I did a master's also in philosophy. And in fact, my master's year overlapped with the Thanawiyya here. So the Thanawiyya, third year Thanawiyya, and MSc research in philosophy was at the same time. So I was back and forth between Edinburgh and Cairo. And then into the Kulliyya, I had some mashayikh who saw in me a certain mindset and said, you are Usul al-Din. So I took their advice and I went to Usul al-Din. And in fact, it was fairly clear once I realized what's on offer that, yes, this is for me, because I know for sure that if I'm going to be studying the Deen in depth, what I want is to study the Qur'an in depth. And if I want to choose to study the Qur'an in depth, I will go to the place that I can see which is going to offer the highest level, which has got the highest authority and reputation. And so it's Al-Azhar. And the best place to focus on that was in Kulliyat Usul al-Din. So that was the natural choice for me. And so I knew that that's where I was going before the years when you choose your takhassus or your particular shu'bah. So of course it was challenging and interesting coming in as a foreign student, number one. Number two, being a bit older, because some of us, having studied before are coming here, and then you're in a class with Egyptian teenagers, and that's a wonderful thing actually in many ways. But there is a little bit of a culture gap there sometimes. And also a gap in enthusiasm also, because a lot of times the people who are there is because they couldn't get into something else, or another university, or another subject, or another kulliyah, or even another takhassus, because even tafsir might not have been their first choice, but they couldn't get into hadith, for example. So it's very demoralizing when you realize that some people are there by dint of circumstance, whereas I have traveled thousands of miles specifically to do this and to benefit from this. And so, the challenges, many of you will know, sometimes in the level that the teachers are willing to go into, because they are concerned that many of the people there are not really that interested. And they don't want to hear Fusha, for example, the old thing of, do they still do this, to speak in Ammiya sometimes in the class? So, it's against the rules, so you're allowed to raise your hand and say, Ustad, if you don't mind, to speak in Fusha. And I did that on a few occasions, and I had a variety of interesting answers that I got to this contention. One of them was, yeah, you're right, but I just want these guys to also understand, meaning the Egyptians. So I was like, if they don't understand Fusha, they're not going to be very good mufassirin, to be honest with you. We're going to have a problem here down the line. So we may as well address that problem right now. But alhamdulillah, it was a wonderful experience in the kulliyah. Definitely a mixed experience. There were some teachers who made a very strong impression on me. One of them, I don't know if he's come here yet, Dr. Al-Futuhaat al-Awari. Did he? Inshallah, I'll put in a good word for you as well, bi'idhnillah. But he was at that time just an ustad of tafsir, and subsequently became Amid of Kulliyat Usul-Din, and mashallah Khatib in Jami al-Azhar. So it's a matter of great pride to have been his student and connected to him. So we learned many tools, and really that's what it is. That's what's emphasized to us. The fact that you're not here gaining expertise and mastery, you're gaining the tools to be essentially a talib ilm, to be a researcher perhaps. But even then, doing the bachelor's, you understand that there's something above this that's called the magister, and there's something above that called the doctorate. Maybe then you could be called an alim, because the equivalent word of the doctorate is alimiyya, right? In the sort of older school way of talking about it. Whereas the baccalaureate is just, they use these various French words, or licence, right? So it is a license to participate in the field at all, not as an expert. But of course, when you go back to the UK, it's hard to sort of just shrug your shoulder and be very humble. I mean, you can be humble, but there is a sense of responsibility, of course, that, well, having done this much, we have to, of course, engage. But of course, the next step is to continue pursuing knowledge. And that can be in the academic route. It can be just through connecting with mashayikh and consolidating the knowledge. After the phase of, intensive input, you need those who are older, who can mentor you, who can say, all right, that's great. You're excited, but you need to now be grounded in the context. You've come back now to your country, and there's a way that things are done here. There's a way that the ulama operate, and the way that they relate to the community. Don't rush to give fatwa or rush to make judgments about things. When you've been away, you also have to reacclimatize. And when I say this, you could probably think of some examples, that you might have seen people doing the opposite, sort of rushing to be too prominent too quickly, etc., etc. So tutelage and mentorship, there's many ways to do that. For me, what I undertook was the PhD journey. So the next step in terms of pursuing knowledge was research, and I applied to various places and got into SOAS, University of London. And it was my first choice also, because there at SOAS we have a very celebrated professor. You know who was my supervisor? Do you know who it was? Professor Muhammad Abdul Halim, Hafidhullah. So he's of course extremely well known for his Quran translation. He's also someone who has been publishing on the subject of the Quran, its balagha and so on in English for many years, and increasing understanding around these things, highlighting the importance of studying the Quran's language to Muslims, to non-Muslims, talking in a way that is, in a sense, universal, and increased people's respect for the classical Arabic and Islamic sciences, right? And Professor Abdul Halim, of course, is from these lands. He went to the Azhar schools before then joining Cairo University and then Cambridge. So Professor Abdul Halim is this combination then between East and West, if I can just be crude like this about the map. And this is something that we were also taught in Al-Azhar, that is something that is very valued, respected. It is for people to perhaps begin their journey in the East and then connect with the West and bring back those ulum, those modes of study. So the last time, just before leaving back when I finished my studies, I delivered a course in the Azhar Mosque on a book by Sheikh Muhammad Abdullah Daraz. That book is a very famous one. Does anyone know what I'm referring to? An-Nabu al-Azim, which in English has been translated as the Qur'an, an Eternal Challenge. So this book by Shaykh Daraz is particularly famous for being grounded in the core sciences of balagha and tafsir, but also offering originality, offering a creative new framework for talking about the Qur'an and what makes it miraculous. So going beyond things that have been focused on in the past, Shaykh Daraz takes us on this journey of looking at the Qur'an as objectively as possible and seeing who brought this Qur'an, who taught this Qur'an, what we know about the Prophet ﷺ, how does that increase our conviction and allow us to convince the skeptic that it's from Allah? How it is a testament and testimony to itself. How we can look to its content, its teachings, how we can look to also specific parts of its content, where it talks about the past or where it talks about the future. And then of course the language itself, which has always been at the core of the discussion of the balagha and the i'jaz of the Qur'an. So Shaykh Daraz is also a person who combines East and West. Because why Al-Azhar is so proud of him is that he went as the mab'uth, so he was officially appointed to go and study in the West and pursue his doctorate at the Sorbonne in Paris, where he completed his various pieces of Quranic research, chief among which is something he published in French as La Morale du Coran, right? So the ethics of the Quran, and in Arabic it was translated into Arabic. Many people don't know this when they see the book. It was translated into Arabic as, does anyone know its title? Dustur al-Akhlaqi fil Quran. And it's more recently been translated into English. Nice full circle here, published under the work of Professor Abdul Halim, although it was another translator, but it's Sheikh Abdul Halim is the sort of editor of that series, and he worked on some of Shaykh Daraz's works in that way. So this combination of East and West, you know, we are trying to be part of that combination in our own ways. Recently, I was asked a few days ago to give a talk to a group of Egyptian students in the Shari'i colleges, as they call it, al-Kulliyat al-Khams. You know, we talk about that in Maqasid, the Sharia and the Kulliyat al-Khams. But here is the 5 Azhari Kulliyas, Azhari colleges, Usul al-Din, of course, first, and Sharia, Dirasat Islamiyya wa Arabiya, and Kulliyat al-Lugha al-Arabiya and Kulliyat al-Da'wah. So from these, they have at the moment, I think they said to me, roughly 150 students who are studying English in this center within the Darrasa campus. And they have people studying French and they have people studying German as well. And the idea is to train them up in the Shari'i sciences, but also in the English language, so that they can do a great job of presenting and defending Islamic beliefs and spreading what Al-Azhar wants to spread to the world. So while I was there, I just thought I'll point out to them that, you know, there's another side of this equation, which is those of us who came from the English-speaking context and English-speaking countries, and we come here, you call us the Wafideen. You should be also thinking about how we can serve this shared purpose. And of course, sometimes we have to take it on ourselves. So nobody sent me to do the PhD and so on, but in my whole journey, I have had it in my conscience that I have to represent my teachers, my institution. I have to do justice to the good that has been given to me. So in the acknowledgements of my PhD, you'll see Dr. Abdul Fattah's name there. Even though I don't think he knew anything about my PhD journey. I'm not good at keeping in touch, unfortunately. So, you know, sometimes people feel that. One time he said to me, كيف حالك أيها التلميذ العاق? Which I took as a kind of loving statement that he missed communication from me, right? So my parents sometimes say the same thing to me. May Allah forgive me. So the point being, That acknowledgement was there because that's a crucial part of my formation. And I would not forget that, and we should not forget that. Any teacher who has given us good, any teacher who has benefited us, even with a few words or a few points of guidance, that is something that becomes a relationship which then we should nurture and treat as salatul rahim, teach as like a parental relationship, isn't it? So the PhD journey was a challenging one, because I had some background in research in a British university context. Nevertheless, how do I take the Islamic sciences that I learned in an Islamic university and now start writing about it in a secular university? It helps that I have a Muslim supervisor. But I am now thinking ahead to who is going to read my eventual research. I chose to focus on tafsir al-Qur'an bil-Qur'an. Interestingly, that was not my initial topic, because when I got into SOAS, the topic that I had selected and proposed, and I was accepted on this basis, was the effect of the 10 qira'at on translation of the Qur'an. So I was very fascinated by this subject. Before leaving Cairo, I collected as many books as I could on Tawjih al-Qira'at and the history of the Qira'at and the Ahruf and Masahif and so on. So my plan was to focus on this piece of research. But Professor Abdul Halim, it turned out, was not that interested in the Qira'at or had a certain skepticism about it. And so I decided to change tack. And so I chose the topic Tafsir al-Qur'an bil-Qur'an. And by the way, just that work that I was going to do as a PhD, I then postponed. And the last couple of years, I've been working solidly on this. And we have produced something for Qur'an.com. I'm fast forwarding in the story here. But we have something that's going to be published on Qur'an.com literally tonight or tomorrow morning, inshallah, called the Qira'at Fact Files. And it is an account of how the variance in readings affects sometimes the meaning and affects sometimes the translation of the Qur'an. Carefully traced to the masadir and explained clearly and carefully according to the way of the scholars of the past. So this will be available very soon, inshallah, on Qur'an.com. I feel like I should get a second PhD out of it, but once you've done the PhD, then that part is over. The PhD is a learning process. It is really training you to be a bahith in the serious sense and to join this thing called the academy, right? And to be able to sit at the table with people who are also the katira. And that's something I've experienced in my life. There are certain contexts and cultures, in a sense, where you kind of need that to be taken seriously, to be heard. And there's a shahwa sometimes for this dal, right? I say, kam min dal la madlula lahu, right? So sometimes there's nothing behind it, and people sometimes they purchase their PhD or they write something very superficial, and now maybe use Chat GPT. I call it al-GPT wa taghut, right? So these things which, it's not necessarily a great thing to have a PhD, but you can choose to use that process effectively, right? To challenge yourself, to do something of worth and of note. So my thesis on Tafsir al-Qur'an al-Qur'an, it was about answering some questions for myself. How does tafsir work? I mean, yeah, sure, I've been attending the university for a number of years, but then as a generally critically inclined person, the things that I'm hearing are just giving me more questions. I'm not thinking that, by attending the class, I'm getting the answers. Rather, I'm nurturing more questions, inshallah, better questions. That's the idea. And then you have to pursue that knowledge. Because knowledge seeking, as with talabul ilm, is of two types. And I don't know if this is a categorization that people say, but this is how I see it. Talab al-ilm is of two types. Talab of ilm that already exists, and talab of ilm that is now boundary seeking, right? So generating new knowledge, right? So talab al-ilm can be you just sit with a teacher, the teacher tells you what they know, And so you didn't know it before. So it's new knowledge, but just new knowledge for you only. But the other kind of talab al-ilm is there are gaps in our knowledge. There are things that we don't know. Collectively, we haven't figured out. So we do talab of it, right? Jihad al-talab, right? Striving, offensively into the boundaries and the horizons of knowledge, seeking it and trying to gain mastery of things that until now are vague and unclear. So to be a bahith means this kind of talab al-ilm. Right? As for just gathering nuqulat and ordering them and putting some analysis, this is not the goal. This is a comfort zone. This is a comfort zone. And that's okay. Like that's considered roughly what you do on the master's level. PhD level should not be like that. PhD level should be at least some aspect of original contribution. That's the way they put it. And you then have to drill down in something until it becomes the case that you are the foremost expert in that thing, maybe of that tiny, tiny little thing. But because you carved it out, you become the expert in that thing, not in the whole of tafsir. But with the thesis, I wanted to write something that would actually be useful to the Muslims, right? And so I tried to think of it that way. Like as I'm writing this, it's not just to pass an exam, but it's something that I want to be able to present to people and that they see the point in doing it. And then at the same time, it was like, well, I'll have to pass an exam eventually. So I have to write it in a way that makes sense in the Western academy, in the secular academy. I have to write in a way that I've kind of defended myself from the potential attacks that could be leveled against me. I was lucky in the end. My examiners were two Egyptian Muslim women. So I had an Egyptian Muslim supervisor and two Egyptian Muslim examiners. So it was a very comfort zone sort of thing. Still, of course, they challenged me. Both of them said to me, why is there not more bint al-Shati in your thesis? You know, Aisha Abdurrahman bint al-Shati, she's considered, the Egyptian Muslim, she's the Egyptian Mufassira. Because she wrote tafsir, which was carving out a new niche in tafsir, along with her Ustad, who was also her husband, Al-Ustad Amin al-Khuli. She carved out this thing called a tafsir al-Bayani. And she laid out theory there, but also in practice did tafsir of a number of surahs, amounting, unfortunately, only to 14 surahs from the shortest surahs of the Qur'an, but laying out a manhaj. And it so happens that one of my examiners was her direct student under the master's Dr. Salwa al-Awwa, and the other one had written extensive research on Bint al-Shati. So they both said, where's Bint al-Shati? They said, she's here on page 62. This is not enough. Add more Bint al-Shati, then you will pass. So alhamdulillah, I added more and I passed and became a doctor, right? Around the same time, something else was happening, and that was I had an opportunity to work with a very prominent da'iyah, speaker and teacher in the Qur'anic Studies. Some of you may know, that's Ustad Nu'man Ali Khan from the US. And he already had an extensive track record in working in this field of, you could say, da'wah with the Qur'an. Allah Azza wa Jalla says, فَذَكِّرْ بِالْقُرْآنِ مَنْ يَخَافُ وَعِيدٍ. So not everything is Quranic studies and dirasat and abhath, but there is also tadhkir, reaching people's hearts with the Qur'an. And I'm very thankful to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for this experience, because it was humbling in many ways. I will grant Ustad Nu'man a lot of credit here that he recognized and recognizes that his own training is one type of study of the Qur'an. I don't want to go into too much of what did he study, how did he study, but what he didn't do is go to Al-Azhar or something like that to study in this, mumanhaj way. So he recognizes that there's another type of knowledge that he needs, that there are gaps, that there's a need for testing his ideas against the book knowledge and the tradition. So that was the role that he appointed me to, and I worked closely with him, mashallah, for a good number of years. And we became sparring partners in the study of the Quran. And it was a beautiful thing because I learned a great deal, maybe as much as, maybe more than what he learned from me. Because a lot of that was me coming face to face with the issue of the relevance of what I have studied and what I'm studying. It put that to the test. A lot of times, you know, what I'm able to draw from the book, I came to realize that I'm not managing to make this the thing that people need that will reach their hearts or that will change their lives. So the best thing, of course, is for these things to come together. You know, and not all the time we are able to achieve everything individually, but we are part of a bigger system, right? My dream, inshallah, in due course, like in the next few years, is to create a program that can teach people to do these things together. You know what we're going to call it? And don't tell anyone. I know this is recorded, but in case anyone tries to steal it, it's trademarked, right? It will be called At-Tahrir wa Tanweer. You know where we get that from? From the tafsir, of course, of Al-Tahir ibn Ashur. So we're already called Ibn Ashur Center. So naturally, our course should be called At-Tahrir wa Tanweer. Adam, I don't know if I even told you this yet. Did I tell you? No? So this is hot off the press, hot off this Tunisian cap that I bought here in the Ghouria area, right? So At-Tahrir, you know, what Shaykh Ibn Ashur intended by this word was not like, what do you call Tahrir Square. Yeah, in our office we have also one of these, like there's a blue plaque and it says Midan al-Tahrir. So that's a homage to Shaykh Ibn Ashur's tafsir and also to my time studying here. So al-Tahrir, what he intends is not liberation, it's not a political point that he was making, but Tahrir al-Ma'na al-Sadid wa Tanweer al-Aql al-Jadid بتفسير الكتاب المجيد. So that's the longer title. So tahrir here means, if you like, liberating the correct meaning, verifying and establishing carefully, doing tahrir and taharri of the meaning of the Qur'an. So this in itself is one of the values that has driven me, which is the importance of taking tafsir very seriously, not assuming that, you know, just glancing at a tafsir book is enough and that tafsir is a very sathi kind of subject, but that there is much to appreciate in the depth of the subject, and there are also areas which still require and will always require more and more research to satisfy our understanding of Allah's words and what He intends us to take from them. So Tahrir al-Ma'na al-Sadid wa Tanweer al-Aql al-Jadid, this is the part where also Ibn Ashur has combined between this, as they say, asala and tajdeed. So the grounding in the Islamic tradition and the confidence and creativity to say something new, to highlight new meanings, and to direct the purpose of the subject to what it deserves. So I think nowadays, Shaykh Al-Imam Muhammad Abdu has mixed there's mixed attitudes towards him in the Azhari milieu. But he was, of course, the Grand Mufti of Egypt. He was no small fry. And his tafsir, or the tafsir that was, you know, from his durus, and then it was compiled by his student Muhammad Rashid Rida, is known as Tafsir al-Manar. And this is considered to be the progenitor of modern tafsir, which is sometimes called a tafsir al-Hida'i. This is a hidayah-focused tafsir. So what had been a largely scholastic subject about grammar and about transmission and about sometimes theology and juristic implications of the ayat became a case of what is the Qur'an saying that humanity urgently needs. And so this became a thing that in the 20th century became more observable in new works of tafsir. Tafsir al-Hida'i, right? So hidayah focused tafsir. So I would like us, for sure, whether we are subscribing to the Abdu school or not, to feel that we should be purposeful in what we study. It's not just for ourselves. It's not just scratch an intellectual itch or to settle old scores. There's people who are still very, very worried about, things that they were debating many centuries ago. And the fact that they didn't settle it then is indicative that we will not settle it now and we will never settle it. Right? So is there any point in every now and again just reigniting the old debates? There are schools that basically died, like the Mu'tazila, that people want to resurrect it every now and again just to have a fight with it. Let sleeping dogs lie. You know, al-fitnatu na'imatun la'ana Allahu man ayqadhaha. A lot of these fitan, people get an enjoyment from reigniting them, right? Whereas someone who is looking at the world as it is will recognize the emergencies that we are in, whether socially and politically, geopolitically and whatever, and even intellectually, the crises that we face. We have little or no time to be dealing in old debates, rehashing them, except if they shine some light on how we will solve the problems of tomorrow. So this is some of the story. Tafsir is da'wah, doing a PhD. Okay, and then translating tafsir. You may take an interest in translation, if you'd like to ask anything about that. But I did, in fact, start the process for myself with Imam al-Suyuti. Something I don't often tell people is when I reached out to some organizations to say that I'm interested in translation, I was offered another project which I said no to, just because I think it's important to learn to say no as well. So the project that I was offered was Ibn al-Jawzi. Even Shaykh Fahim is a close friend of mine. I don't think he knows this. I was offered Ibn al-Jawzi's al-Muntazam fi Tarikh al-Muluki wal-Umam, something like this. So even I don't know the title, you see the problem? But his book of Tarikh. And I said, I will be terrible for this, because history is not my subject. And I might not know the difference between what was the name of a country, what was an ordinary word, or what was the name of a donkey. I will not be able to tell the mustalahat of tarikh. It's not my field. I'll fall into error. And this is what people do when they translate something that they're not qualified to translate. And I often say that translation is like teaching, right? And if you are not qualified to teach in a certain ilm, then you are not qualified to translate it either. Right? If you cannot sit in front of a class of peers or a class of students who are, uqala, and teach on a certain subject and answer their questions convincingly, then what makes you think that you can take the book from our core ulum, tafsir, aqidah, fiqh, hadith, etc., and translate that? Because if you cannot teach it, then you do not understand the text well enough. And you are just looking at it as a string of words. You are like a machine translator, but possibly worse. Because, the issue of jahl murakkab. If you don't know, like I had a jahl yani basit. I knew I was a jahil, you see, in the area of tarikh. But it meant that when I was offered something that would work, Imam al-Suyuti's itqan is not easy, but I felt like that's a challenge that I can rise to, because I have the various aliyat of what we studied in Al-Azhar, what we're studying. Even at that time, I was still studying. So the chapters that were apportioned to me for this bigger project out of Qatar was what corresponds to the second quarter of the book, chapters 36 through 42, Gharib al-Qur'an, other dialects and foreign words or loan words in the Arabic and Qur'an, al-wujuh al-nadha'ir in the linguistic context, al-adawat, al-i'rab, al-qawa'id. These are the chapters. So I thought, I'd love to study this. I'd love to study this from Imam al-Suyuti, basically, right? And undertake the challenge of translating it. And it was difficult. Also, I had a person appointed on the project whose job was to oversee my work and to give feedback and correct it. I don't know how you'll feel about this, but it's a non-Muslim, if you like, Orientalist from Russia called Professor Alexander Knish, and he's a famous professor actually in Michigan University. So his job was to read my work and to send feedback. So I knew that I'm not alone also. This is before my PhD, just so you know. So I gained a lot of confidence from that project. I gained a lot of knowledge from that project in in a strange way, but I'm just telling you what I feel sincerely, that I was learning from Imam al-Suyuti in that context. And later on, I would learn from Imam al-Razi in translating their works. Now, and now from Imam ibn Ashur, of course. So in all of these cases, I cannot claim that I am actually genuinely their student, or to claim that they would be satisfied with what I've done, but that's what I'm aiming for. The sense of responsibility and burden you have to the text and the Turath that you're working with. You don't take it lightly, because there's a day of judgment. It's coming for all of us. And I just want to be able to meet these Imams and for them to say, you're the one who did the English? Quiz, yeah? Maya. Or maybe have a note. I would love to get the note. Imam al-Suyuti saying, actually, no, this wasn't quite right. Or Imam al-Razi saying, you're a basic understander of my perspective. That would be more than enough for me. So not to be, we are not experts compared to these giants. We are just, we are honored to be attached to them at all. And then with this new project with Tafsir of Ibn Ashur, we are very clear about this notion that we are prioritizing his project and his thought and his tarjih and his tafsir and his tanweer, and we are just at the service of the great insights that he has shared. But then you are also at the service of the readers. You have to think about what you are producing and how to be of benefit to people. It's not just about getting the job done. I hope that anyone who looks at these works that we've published, so later on, of course, Imam al-Razi's Great Exegesis, Volume 1, and then other volumes that we didn't publish as such, but they're, parts of them are available here and there. So you would see that, I'm never just trying to get the job done and finish the job and get paid and pretend that I've done something. I'm thinking about every page, every sentence, every word. Someone may indeed read this. And one of the loveliest things in my life is when someone comes and tells me that they did read something. Because at the time you're doing it, it's very lonely and you don't know that anyone will ever read it. And the temptation can be there. Just look, this fiqh page is very complicated. Is anyone going to read this in English? If they don't know Arabic, then they have no business reading this anyway. They would not have the stamina to reach this page. No one's going to read this page specifically, Sohaib. Just take it easy. And if they know Arabic, then they're reading it in Arabic. Why would they be reading your translation anyway, Sohaib? This is the shaitan, So no, I never accepted that. Everything. Satus'alun. That's it. I often say to my colleagues as well, Adam will hear this frequently, inshallah. I often say, wouldn't it be much easier if we didn't care? Wouldn't it be much easier if we didn't believe in the Day of Judgment? And sometimes I look at some people's work and I'm sure that they believe. I'm not making takfir, but sometimes I wonder, do these people believe in the Day of Judgment? They don't think that every word is being audited from on high, and they just rush a job and they put out anything. This Qur'an fact files, how much sleep we've lost over them, and it's not published yet. And I know that on the day of publishing, we are going to receive dozens of corrections from the Qur'an people, and I will welcome them and will implement. Believe me, we read them tons of times. But even then, perfection is something that we cannot attain. And the sense of responsibility and responsiveness is something that is part, of course, of our values. So, what else do you want to know? We are basically, now we are working on this new Quran translation. I won't say too much about it unless you want to ask. But the other side of what we're working on just now is this digital world. The last few days I've been having discussions with colleagues and seniors in the Quran tech world, you can say, founders and leaders of this wonderful project called Quran.com, which has been around for much longer than I have been involved in it, something that I've used since the beginning of studying. Since the early, around 2010, we have this legacy site of Qur'an.com, and then they've updated it. And through a series of events, which I can only describe as 100% divinely controlled, I have ended up at the helm, and therefore under this immense test and tribulation of having to answer for this site and the decisions that it makes in the tech field. My colleague Shaykh Fahim here is part of that, and particularly involved with the side of it that is to do with community reflection on the Qur'an. And we have a whole project called QuranReflect.com. And that aspect of relevance that I was talking about is pivotal. There's so much complexity in the work, and I've appreciated that on this trip. I was just saying to the head of the project that, until hearing all these things that they were discussing about the tech side of it, I had no idea how enormous the task is, how complex it is, how many aspects, how many layers, how many problems. And then there's the high-level problems, the AI apocalypse. How are we going to continue to be relevant? People's attention is shifting all the time, from the physical worlds and the physical books to the digital world and the digital books. And even the digital world is becoming replaced with the AI. So how are we going to keep ahead of the curve? It's very frightening, actually. But in all things, of course, where there's a test, there's an opportunity to do things right and to earn the reward. And it's all part of إِنَّا نَحْنُ نَزِّلْنَا الذِّكْرَ وَإِنَّا لَهُ لَحَافِظُونَ. Allah Azza wa Jal has guaranteed to preserve this book, and then He has appointed those who would rise to the challenges of every period, whether that is the period of revelation as they scramble to write down everything, and then the period of compilation, and then the period of standardization under the leadership of Sayyidina Uthman radiallahu anhu, the periods of expansion, consolidation, of codification, all the qira'at and the works on the qira'at and how these things have reflected the fulfillment of Allah's promise that this book will be preserved. But no one could just rest on their laurels and say, Allah has promised to preserve it, so go to sleep, Habibi. No, they worked extremely hard, and they did extremely productive and genius things to preserve the deen. They created the ulum. They scrambled to preserve the meaning of the Qur'an. They created a field called Nahu, and another one called Sarf, another one called Balagha, and many, many ulum, auxiliary ulum, all to preserve this Qur'an. The qira'at, the masahif, addul ay. How many ulum? We can't even count them. So there's never an opportunity to just sit back and say Allah will guarantee the preservation. Rather, Allah is guaranteeing it through those who are chosen to step up to the plate, to preserve its meanings, to perfect its translation as far as humanly possible, while of course feeling at every stage our utter inability to encompass this Qur'an in our understanding and in whatever attempts we do to render it into another language. To preserve it from the doubts that are raised against it at every stage and in every age. And now we are having to look at what are the challenges that are being directed towards this deen and towards our book, which we then have to see, how do we make sure that the answer gets out there? And this is, this requires us to come together. The scholars of the tradition, the scholars of contemporary knowledge, and those who are also involved in the new media, the new ways of reaching people. These devices, people are abandoning the books and for the devices, and we can complain about it or we can get with the program, right? If you can't beat them, join them, right? So somehow we have to find this connection. So this trip anyway is part of renewing our ahd with Egypt and with the Azhar and with the ulama, and trying to create this synergy and this connection, which we hope can continue to feed into these projects. May Allah give us tawfiq and guide our steps. And I pray that all of you are part of the service of this deen, because the most that we can hope for is simply to be accepted and simply to be of service and simply to be on the right path and to invite others to that path. وصلى الله وسلم على سيدنا محمد وآخر دعوانا أن الحمد لله رب العالمين. And of course, I'm happy to have any questions and discussion.